The title of this presentation is taken from a definition of culture by the anthropologist Clifford Geertz, and he defines culture as the ensemble of stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. Thank you. It's a definition I see as deeply relevant to understanding the roles that artists can play in both validating and challenging ideas of community, representation, and belonging in relation to land and landscape in particular. I'll talk about 3 projects today, each of which makes use of archives or archival processes to activate a public conversation about forgotten, disregarded, or unacknowledged aspects of contemporary rural life. I used to live in the Burren, a very beautiful place that's also a contested site, renowned for a conflict about tourism, conservation and development that played out through the Irish High Court, Supreme Court and the European Court of Justice for over a decade. Although long resolved, the conflict actually left a legacy of suspicion and mistrust that continues to reverberate whenever there are public discussions about the future development of the area. As an artist, one of my concerns was about how best to contribute to a better public understanding of the complex issues underlying and affecting the area. In the course of my research, I looked for a site that could be activated, where different ideas around place and community could be acknowledged. The former post office close to the area had been shut for many years, so in 2007, I decided to reopen it. The ex-post office was sufficiently familiar within the cultural life of the area to make visitors feel welcome. Reactivated and branded Expo, it offered a sense of possibility for the abandoned building, a space in which to review and renew public understanding of the history and living culture of a particular place, where different kinds of knowledge, natural, social, cultural, agricultural, could be heard, acknowledged, and exchanged. Expo was introduced to the wider communities of the Burren through an archival exhibition of the belongings of the former postmaster, Matty Rinn. His books, papers, journals, copybooks, and correspondence courses pointed to a life fueled by reading, listening, and continuous intellectual inquiry. Mixed amongst his belongings were cassette recordings made from language courses he'd recorded from the BBC's World Service from the 1970s through to the 1980s. Matty taught himself French, German, Italian, Dutch, and Spanish. The installation highlighted the hidden complexities of an individual that was revelatory both to locals and to outsiders. And the potential of such an intimate archival installation to surface the stories of place was something that was embraced by the clubs and the groups and individuals that began using Expo. A mapping group meet every week, comparing and exchanging information on the lived history and heritage of the area. They hold annual exhibitions of their dinshanakas, or tracings of family and kinship in the parish. That public exhibition-making process is part of their research methodology, and they began by drawing on information gathered by this man, Paddy Cahir, about people who used to live in the area. They started by tracing the occupants of houses going back to the earliest records. When they finished the houses, they began on the roads, paths, and tracks. When they finished those, they began on the field names, and that's where they're at right now. So I'm going to show a really short clip, which really, I think, demonstrates that this is not a passive process. It's a very active process.
Yes, and of course, yeah, I should say in this instance which was a great source, the 1901 census and the 1911 census. We used them. And we went into the graveyards and read headstones, and you get information in there too, you know. But the biggest one I'd say is to go out and talk to the older people in the community. That was the one, really. They have the story, you know. Yeah, and we brought them in here. They came in here and chatted with us many tonight. It was very good to have them on a map, yeah, and they were able to follow and show that where the house was on such a road, and you know, a sense of place. You have to have the map, like really, yeah.
This archival impulse can make displaced or lost historical information physically present as a kind of alternative knowledge or counter-memory. This was also the case with another group who called themselves the Rinomona Research Group, who represented their version of the story of Harvard anthropologist Arnsberg and Kimball, who visited and wrote about the area in the 1930s. Their books, Family and Community in Ireland and The Irish Countryman, remain influential and continues to be used within academia. The account of individuals described in the books were, however, a cause of significant hurt to some of their descendants. Anne Byrne from NUIG had been given a copy of the field diaries of the anthropologists, and this became a starting point for a public re-representation of the anthropological study. Photographs, objects and belongings of those written about in the study were installed in an exhibition that publicly asserted the Rinomona Research Group's amended version into the official narrative. A further ready-made archive surfaced in the course of the first year of the XPO project. This was a collection of more than 25,000 photographs taken by local man Peter Rees, which provided an opportunity to acknowledge the contested recent history of the area, but situated it within the everyday reality of gatherings, school events, straw boys, communions and sporting events, the social history of the parish. This is the Legion of Mary gathering in the 1990s. The installation was hosted by Peter and his family over a 3-week period, and it was visited by over 500 people in the course of that time. I should stress that Kilnaboy Parish only has 500 families. So if one were to apply the Arts Council's benchmark, I think this would be 100% track record, really, of audiencing artworks. The production of unexpected ideas and new insights through knowledge sharing was fundamental to a process used at Expo that drew on the memory trace of rural collectivity, but was applied to the sharing of ideas. It's a process I called mind mehel. People brought questions about particular issues, and these were circulated using academic, social, and cultural networks to try and find answers. I was asked to hold a mind mehel by the Turf Cutters Contractors Association in 2012, who felt excluded and marginalised by the consultation process around the designation of special areas of conservation when EU Natura 2000 legislation became law. A subsequent archival installation at Limerick City Gallery included personal material owned by TCCA members, special reports commissioned by conservation and state agencies, academic research, and interviews. Photographic images from the museum's collections and paintings from the museum's collection, a film, Rohach, by artist Vivian Dick, a turf stack built by the Harrigan family, and press cuttings of the history of the conflict on the regulation of turf cutting were all installed within the gallery. The archive constituted a kind of learning space in which to review the material, reflect upon the contents and the broader social and cultural issues raised by the regulation of rural landscapes. Circulation of information, the use of cultural capital to activate a wider conversation about the relationship between rural and urban places was also a key part of the process. This is an image of the art writer and theorist Lucy Lippard presenting on the role of public art in rural places at the Creative Time Conference in New York in 2013. So the final archive I'm going to talk about is the archive belonging to this museum, the Museum of English Rural Life, which is part of the University of Reading. And I was invited to do a residency there and produce an artwork from that residency last summer. The residency provided an opportunity to look at the lost history of different forms of grasslands and forage. In particular, older varieties of forage, such as sainfoin, a plant that was in widespread use in the south of England up until the 1960s. I wanted to focus on the archives to investigate the idea of producing carbon-neutral beef. I was thinking at the time about sustaining small farmers whose farms aren't large enough to be economically productive. And how do you add value to the production of small farms? Research at Reading University indicates that sainfoin reduces bloating in livestock and hence reduces methane production, and grows in near drought conditions. It also has a beneficial effect on biodiversity and the quality of food products. It's loved by bees and improves animal health and fixes nitrogen in the soil. So generally, it's a kind of wonder plant. I trolled the archives for references to sainfoin use, as well as visiting and filming in the university research farms. So these objects, this sainfoin fork, the books, including the Ladybird book archives and original artworks used in the Ladybird books. The outcome is a film about the relationship between tacit farming knowledge and scientific research, and the necessity for both to come together to respond to the complex material, environmental, and social conditions being produced by climate change today. It was installed within the museum archives in October last year, and it will be shown next year as part of Galway Arts Festival. So I'm going to conclude with a very short little film that was made for Speculative Optimism, which is the name I gave the resulting archive, the resulting film. So, that's it.